Hello everyone, welcome back to the Litcenter channel. My name is Finn and in this video we are going to talk about the Iliad. This ancient Greek epic poem is definitely one of the most influential literary works of all time. Even though most people have never actually read the epic, most still have heard about the city of Troy, the warrior Achilles and the author Homer. That is because the work touches and in many cases invented themes that make for a great story. For more than 3,000 years, the story has captivated people from all walks of life. This success still resonates today with movie adaptations and high book sales. In this video, we will analyze, offer an historical context and summarize the oldest work in Western literature, the Iliad. The Iliad is believed to be composed around the 8th or 7th century BC and is traditionally attributed to the poet Homer. But just like most ancient epics, the story itself is much older than the version Homer composed. You see, the story comes from a long oral tradition, passed down for generations before it was ever written down. To understand the Iliad and the oral origins of the story, we must first go back to the world in which it originated. A world that was already very ancient by the time Homer told his story. The events of the epic are set during the legendary Trojan War. The Greeks believed this war took place in the distant past, around the late Bronze Age, roughly 1200 BC. This was a time of wealthy kingdoms, long-distance sea trade and a constant rivalry between powerful states. Troy, or Ilion as the Greeks called it, hence the name the Iliad, is a city at the heart of the story. It was located near the Dardanelles, a narrow strait linking the Aegean Sea to the Black Sea. Whoever controlled this passage could control trade in the region, so besides the mythical motivation for the war, that may have also been one of the real-life reasons behind the war legends. But here's the important thing. The version of the Iliad we have was composed many centuries later, probably around the 8th century BC, and by then the Bronze Age palaces had fallen, the great Mycenaean cities were ruins, and means of writing had been lost for hundreds of years. Greece had entered a new era, what we now call the Archaic period. So, if there was no writing system, how did these stories survive? Well, the stories around the War of Troy survived those dark centuries through an oral tradition. Bards and singers, called iadoi in ancient Greek, memorized huge amounts of verse and performed them aloud. They did not have books and they did not write. Instead, they used rhythm, repetition and fixed descriptions, like swift-footed Achilles, to make the lines easier to remember. This means that each performance could change slightly depending on the audience in front of the iadoi. Tradition says that the Iliad was the work of a single poet named Homer, but contemporary historians are not completely sure about that. Some think that Homer was a real person who took older stories and shaped them into the epic we know today, while others believe Homer might not have been one person at all, but a name used to represent a long line of poets who passed down the story over generations. This debate is known as the Homeric Question, and it still has no final answer. If you are interested in a mysterious figure that is Homer, I have an entire video devoted to him, which you can watch on the channel. So now that we have established a cultural background for the epic, let's take a look at what the story itself is about. The poem is divided into 24 books, numbered according to the Greek alphabet from alpha to omega. Each book has roughly 800 lines. Essentially, the Iliad tells the story of Achilles' anger and the war in Troy. But contrary to what most people think, the Iliad only focuses on just a short episode near the end of the Trojan War. The poem doesn't cover this whole conflict, which according to tradition lasted 10 years. For example, the famous story of the Greeks taking Troy with the Trojan horse is not in the Iliad. That story appears later in the Odyssey. The story begins with a quarrel. Agamemnon, the leader of the Greek forces, insults Achilles by taking a war prize. A woman named Briseis. Humiliated, Achilles withdraws from fighting, refusing to help the Greeks. This decision has huge consequences, as without their strongest warrior, the Greek army begins to suffer heavy losses at the hands of the Trojans led by Prince Hector. Throughout the epic, we see a cycle of rage, pride and revenge. Hector kills many Greek warriors and the Greeks are pushed to the brink of defeat. Meanwhile, Achilles is torn between personal honor and responsibility. His anger dominates much of the poem, showing how individual pride can shape the fate of entire communities. The turning point of the story comes when Achilles' close friend Patroclus is killed by Hector while wearing Achilles' armor. Devastated and enraged, Achilles returns to the battlefield with unstoppable force, seeking revenge. He kills Hector in a dramatic duel and initially refuses to return the body to the Trojans. Eventually, the king of Troy, Priam, comes to Achilles to beg for his son's body. In a powerful moment of empathy and humanity, Achilles agrees, showing that even the greatest hero is capable of compassion and understanding. The Iliad ends not with the fall of Troy, but with Hector's funeral, emphasizing that the story is not just about war, but also about human experience, mortality, and the bonds between people. In the Iliad, the gods like Zeus, Poseidon, etc. are powerful characters who live above humans, but still take a very active role in their lives. They aren't just watching the action, they interfere in battles, help certain heroes, or even argue with each other over what should happen. For example, Athena often helps the Greek warriors, while Apollo supports the Trojans. But the gods don't always act fairly. They sometimes act on personal grudges or favorites they have, which can make the war even more unpredictable. The presence of the gods shows that the world of the Iliad is one where humans can't control everything on their own. No matter how strong or brave a hero is, their success can depend on whether a god decides to help or hinder them. At the same time, the gods' actions reflect human feelings, jealousy, anger, and loyalty. So even though they are supernatural, their behavior is often very human. Another central idea in the Iliad is Kleos, which roughly means glory or fame. In the world of ancient Greek, heroes are driven by the desire to be remembered. It is not just about living or dying, it's about leaving a name that people would talk about for generations. For example, Achilles, the greatest Greek warrior, chooses to fight in the Trojan War even though he knows it will be his death. Why? Because dying with honor in battle would give him eternal glory, whereas a long, quiet life would mean being forgotten. In short, Kleos isn't just a reward, it's the driving force behind the character's choices. It explains why battles are fought with such passion and why honor matters much more than life itself. Before we finish, it's interesting to note that while the Iliad itself is a work of literature, archaeology has shown that there really was a city that matches the description of ancient Troy. This city was destroyed multiple times during the late Bronze Age. These discoveries don't prove the events of the Iliad, but they do show that the story was inspired by real places and ancient memories. Finally, let's listen to the first lines of the Iliad in ancient Greek. The same lines someone in Greece might have heard more than 3,000 years ago.
Meninaedetea, peleiadio Achilleos, ulamenen, emyriakaiui salgeteke, pollas diptimus, psiukas, aidi proiapsen, eroon, autus de gloria teuche, cunessin, oio noi site passi, Dios de teleto bulle, exude da prota, Dios teten erisante, Atreides te anaxandro, cae Dios Achilleus. Distars poeteon, eridixione ece majestai, letus cae Dios huios, hogar, basilei colotes, nu sonen astraton orse cacen, oleconto de laoi.
So that's it for this video about the Iliad. If you are interested in ancient Greek literature, I have an entire video devoted to this subject. You can find it on the channel.